So today we're celebrating the launch of our new report that Turn to Us and the Bennett Institute have collaborated on. And the report details a model of thriving. So I'm going to give a quick introduction, then I'll hand over to the rest of our panel and we'll talk for about 25 minutes and then we'll have about half an hour for questions. So if questions come through, if you think of questions as we're talking, feel free to pop them in the chat or save them. And yeah, I'll facilitate a Q&A at the end. So for those of you who don't know, Turn to Us is a national anti-poverty charity. We've been running for 124 years. And we decided to get involved in this project because thriving is an integral part of our strategic purpose. And that is because we want to see everyone have the opportunity to build financial security and thrive. Or sometimes we say thriving and not just surviving. And we did this report and this research in a participatory way because we work in co-production with people with a lived experience of financial hardship across all our work. So it was only natural that we would do this piece of research in such a way as well. And we co-produce our work, and we've been working this way for about 2 years. We do this namely for two reasons. Firstly, we think it's the ethical way to work as a charity. It disrupts that paternalistic tradition that charities have of doing 4 or 2 people using the services rather than doing with. And also it is a more effective way to work because it fills a necessary insight gap. And our kind of overarching purpose of co-production is we say that we co-produce our work so that we learn from one another and so that we can combine the power of lived experience with the collective power of Turn to Us. And that puts us in a more meaningful position to challenge the symptoms of poverty. So quickly, an overview of the collaboration of, and when I say Turn to Us, I'm referring to both staff and co-production partners, so professional and lived expertise. So the collaboration between Turn to Us and Bennett came about because we both realised that, yeah, we want to all understand thriving better and we want to all do it in a participatory way. So as we already had a culture and a system of working in that way, we led on recruiting people. So we circulated a recruitment opportunity. I think we interviewed about 8 people and hired 4 people to be part of the core working group alongside staff and the staff at Bennett. And then we offered everyone that we did interview and that applied to come and join us for a workshop further down the line. So everyone that has a lived experience and expressed an interest in wanting to be involved in the project was able to get involved at some point. And of course, the power dynamic in a project like this is really stark. You've got people in a very elite institution and people in a frontline professional setting, and then people that have had a lived experience of financial hardship. So the mitigations against that power dynamic are really important, namely, paying everyone for the work and ensuring that everyone gets an opportunity to deliberate it together. So not just Bennett, for example, explaining what thriving is, was actually all having that conversation together. Delivering the workshops together. So again, not just Turn to Us facilitating, people delivering the workshops together. And crucially, all interviewing one another rather than just academics interviewing people with lived experience, because that's quite a common dynamic. So yeah, that is something that we did as well. We all interviewed one another, but then centered the data from people with lived experience. James is going to speak more about the process, so I won't go into it too much. But when we did a review of that process in July time, one person with lived experience did comment that they thought the power dynamic was amazing. So that felt really good. Quickly, just a few more learnings from me. I think the reason that I would class this as a relative success is that like strong and skillful facilitation is really important. It builds trust and it shows people can open up. I think we're going to discuss later on about scaling this up and the need to scale it up and do it across the sector. I think that is really, really possible, but I think the tension would be how to like maintain that necessary trust and that necessary like deep relationship building in order to generate the insight needed. And the other key thing is like, don't underestimate the emotion that is associated with this. It is an emotionally triggering thing, so it needs to be handled sensitively. And again, that's part of that scaling up conversation. Okay, so that's from me. So we're going to hear from the rest of the panel now. We'll hear from Anna, James, Mark, and then Jen. And then, yeah, we'll have hopefully about half an hour for Q&A. So I'll hand over to Anna.
Thank you, Abby, for a great introduction and indeed for the amazing way in which you have chaired this whole exercise. It's been a huge learning experience for all of us. So we had different reasons to undertake this project. And for me personally, the reason was to improve the sciences of well-being, a field in which I have lovingly participated for the past 15 years, a field in which a lot of progress has happened recently. A lot of public visibility, a lot of policy involvement, but it needs improvement. Our field, the sciences of well-being, have started off with these very idealistic and humanistic ambitions to explore and represent how it is that people flourish and how they can do so more. But these very worthy goals are sometimes, in fact, I would say typically, pursued with a methodology that isn't quite as human-centered, and that is, in fact, often very technocratic. And here's why it happens. Scientists value a great deal what they call a rigor of their methods and of their data. But in case of well-being, what they mean by rigor is often quite narrow, which is a reliance on standardized questionnaires as the sole way of learning about human well-being. And we as scientists invest in a lot of effort into validating those questionnaires, into debating which questionnaires are valid, but we don't really question the very idea that it's down to us, to the experts, to decide whether a questionnaire is valid and the questionnaire is the right way to talk to people. So imagine though if you had a lot to say about well-being, say because you have had some valuable lived experience through living through adversity or thriving through adversity or helping others do so. But imagine if your only opportunity to have your voice heard was through filling out a prepackaged questionnaire. In that case, you wouldn't be able to talk back at the way questions are posed to you. And this is really the situation in which we're now. So we devise a lot of questionnaires, we say that they're valid, and we often now tell even organizations saying, look, these are the banks of questionnaires we've developed. You don't need to have your own. We have already, our experts have already pre-validated everything you need to do. So these are the properly robust and scientific ones for you to use. So I know it is a very tempting and easy thing to fall into especially for organizations who are struggling to stay afloat and to prove to the government and their funders their worth. But there is something wrong with this very assumption of a pre-validated questionnaire. It's wrong for two reasons. No expert can ever vet a survey once and for all. That's just a misunderstanding what validation is. And second, there is an ethical problem with it, which is what Abby's already mentioned. If you are not entering into a proper dialogue with the person whose well-being you're trying to understand, if they're not able to talk back to you at the way that you pose the question, and the way that you frame the problem, then that's just lack of respect for the person that you're trying to understand. And again, there are plenty of situations in which use of standardized measures is unavoidable and just far too convenient and practical. But it is still worth trying to articulate an alternative methodology, which is what we try to do. This participatory methodology that we're launching today is one of our outputs. The other thing we're launching is the theory of thriving itself. And this is what Mark and James will talk about shortly. And this is an important second output because, look, there is a general meaning of thriving, all things considered. That's how philosophers and others have approached well-being or thriving for today we're using those terms synonymously. But there is a great temptation to think that all things considered thriving is the only interesting thriving. We are interested here in thriving in context. And in our case, the context is financial hardship. What would it mean to thrive in financial hardship? This is a contextual theory of well-being, and that is also really worthwhile developing because there's a great temptation in the sciences of well-being to think that we're going to come up with a happiness equation where on the left-hand side you'd have well-being, and on the right-hand side you'd have a series of variables that contribute to well-being. And the only thing that varies is the coefficients that you attach to the variables on the right-hand side. Well, this is also useful and interesting and worthwhile, but it shouldn't be the only model of knowledge about well-being. What we have found talking to our lived experts and through our long and well-chaired conversation is that people come up with their own equations, and people challenge the vocabulary in which experts frame well-being, life satisfaction, or whatever it is. And in the process, they are building up a theory that is contextual. So is our model generalizable in general, the methodology, the theory? You can ask all sorts of worthwhile and good questions about it, and we are happy to offer you our thoughts. But my main sort of takeaway lesson in the conclusion is that coproduction teaches us how knowledge about well-being can be both respectful and more true to life. And this is why I feel very lucky and privileged to have participated in this exercise. Over to James now.
Thank you, Anna. Hi, everybody. My name's James. I'm a co-production partner with Turn to Us with lived experience, and I joined the project at the beginning, 9 months ago or so, a bit more. And interestingly, when I started working with Turn to Us, a co-production partner, 12 months ago or more, I was always interested about their strapline of thriving, not just surviving, and how that related to me in my life experience as a professional who's thrived and not thrived with various different experiences, with means, without means, with money, in work, out of work, etc. And so when the project was advertised for kind of research and people to engage with, it was very interesting. So that was the hook, really. It was a very interesting topic because of these, I guess, standardized parameters and surveys that have been mentioned, which are kind of a bit abstract and compartmentalize what thriving means to the organisers of these surveys and existing parameters of what success means in life. And I, as an individual, went down that route of getting a degree, economics, great career. So I went down the traditional, what makes a success of oneself and thrive in society. However, I did all that and wasn't thriving, and I suffered and ended up in financial hardship. And so the concept was interesting, and I was very intrigued to be engaged. And from the outset, the introductory meetings with all the other co-production partners in the core group, there was 8 of us, and then there was the experts from Turn to Us, the academics, Anna and Mark as well from Bennett. It was an interesting proposition to get involved in, being connected with Cambridge University, Turn to Us, learning more, and actually being valued. That was really important. My story was authentic, it was appealing, it was valued really with open ears and open minds. And that framework of having like a non-judgmental approach to how the research was going to take place in the following 9 months made me feel at ease, as it did with other co-production partners I know, because we have different experiences of life and we were safeguarded, and that was building trust amongst each other with Turn to Us and also with the Bennett Institute as well. So that was underpinning everything that we did, so that we could then speak freely about what our experiences of financial hardship, what thriving actually means to us, because in a quantitative survey that can seem a bit abstract, ironically, and so non-real, if you like. So we went about group meetings, got to know each other. It was all electronically during the last COVID year. So we were still able to build rapport, build trust with each other, as outlined by the facilitators, Abby and Anna and Mark as well. Building that at the outset was really important because we didn't necessarily know one another, and we were allowed to have time out if we didn't feel emotionally stable to participate. And that framework was outlined at the outset, so that really set up a really nice start to the project. And then after a few group meetings to set out what the ambitions were for the project and the goals, we then commenced interviewing each other really quite informally, whether it would be myself as a co-production partner speaking with Anna, asking questions, what does thriving mean to you? What experiences have you had when you were thriving? What are the circumstances? And so getting all that real, authentic information into what has become the report and our findings was essential really to help us build the model. And with Turn to Us, likewise, I was speaking to staff in 40-minute sessions that we were empowered to facilitate ourselves. And so that was really good. And I spoke with various other co-production partners and built up this catalogue, if you like, of hours of interviews that were then collated by Mark and the team to build up some consistent findings. And then we got together again as a whole team. We fed back our thoughts and everything that we found ourselves and how we were feeling about the project, how it was going. And as sort of Abby mentioned as well, we really collectively, there's co-production partners, but genuinely engaged, generally valued, and 100% non-judged. And we were really on a level, and that was really quite important. There was no kind of hierarchy at all, and that was important from the outset, and that was followed through. We were just people at the end of the day, like all of us here, all 50 odd of us are here, we're all on a level field with different experiences, and that came through in our findings. And thriving doesn't necessarily mean just our practical measures. It's justice means it's the process of exploring and sharing all that stuff that we've had in our lives through thick and thin, really was all part of building the research in the core group. So that's the whistle stop of the co-production part. And Mark, if you would like to take over.
Thanks, James. I've just got a few slides, so I'll quickly screen share, just so we can give you a sense for the model and things. So I'm not on the right slide. Okay, so I just thought I'd give you, similarly to everyone else, a kind of whistle-stop tour of the process we went through and then the theory. Obviously, if you want more detail, we have included a link to the whole long academic working paper. Hopefully you've all gotten that by email. Otherwise, it's on the Bennett Institute website, and there's a lot more detail in there about everything what Anna talked about, what James talked about, Abby talked about, and what I'm going to talk about. So the first thing in the co-production, what we wanted to do along the lines of what Abby was mentioning about sharing power and learning from each other, was that we kind of conceptualize this as sort of three different varieties of expertise. So we have people with the lived experience, and that gives them an expertise about the value judgments that we want to center when we're creating this context-sensitive theory of well-being. Then we have the professional experts, or the practitioners, we might call them. That's the people from Turn to Us, and they have a very good sense of what kind of theory of thriving and what kind of measures of thriving would be useful to them in their work. So I think this is one of the most important aspects of co-producing, is that you can make sure that whatever you come up with is very practicable, which is something that I think, particularly in academic discourses, we often sort of miss. And then finally, you have the academic experts, and I think our role here is really in terms of whatever comes out of the process, we just try to tighten it up a bit. So make sure it's a bit more logically consistent, or ensure that the measures are statistically valid, this kind of stuff. We really don't take the lead. We try mostly to listen and then just adapt what's coming out to be a bit more polished. Okay, the process that we went through, I guess an important goal for us was to balance the need to get very detailed, rich, qualitative data, which we can only get by having these quite long conversations with people who have relevant lived experience and a practical understanding. And we want to balance that with representativeness. So qualitative studies, if you wanted to interview 5,000 people, you would drown in that data, and it would take you way too long. At the same time, if we only interview in detail maybe 16 people, then we might sort of miss some important issues. So what we started with in our policy was that Turn to Us, very fortunately for us, has a newsletter mailing list that goes out, I think, monthly to about 4,000 people. And we asked people on that mailing list to please fill out a very quick survey that took kind of less than 10 minutes. And we just gave them some basic demographic questions. And then we also asked them a few quick kind of rank these items in terms of how much they resonate with your thriving. So that gave us a kind of initial steer to make sure we didn't go off in the wrong direction. And then we came to the working group that James was talking about. After the working group had met for a few months, we came out with a preliminary report, and then we took that report to a workshop that was about a half-day event, and we got another 10 lived experience people in to help us with the co-production to try to improve the generalizability of our theory. And so we improved how representative we were there on age and people with neurodivergent personalities, different parts of geography in the United Kingdom, different life experiences and that sort of thing. And then after the workshop, we have the report that you will have all seen. And now we're going to again go back to that newsletter mailing list and ask them for comments on that report to see whether they think we've sort of captured their experiences or whether we've missed something out. So hopefully this way we've balanced that rich qualitative data and the representativeness of what we've done. This is just the working group to see if you can manage this whole thing over Zoom. It worked remarkably well. So if there's any interest in kind of replicating our methodology, I hope that the paper we've shared with you all does kind of provide enough detail to do that. So the theory that we came up with, again, a very context-specific theory, has sort of three parts. The first thing was the means. And I guess probably the most prominent theme in the discussions was that basic needs are very fundamental. We're talking here about income, housing, mental health support, being able to pay your bills, not having debt, that sort of thing. So that was absolutely critical to thriving in financial hardship. And I guess that's pretty unsurprising. But there was also a very strong emphasis on what we're calling justice-focused means, which is about being enfranchised and about having freedom from various sorts of oppression, whether it's racism, classism, sexism, discrimination on sexuality, disability, whatever it might be. But a second strong theme was that, one, thriving is a very subjective experience that differs for each person. And also that just because you have the means doesn't mean that you necessarily thrive, because you might not really know what to do with them. And so there was this strong idea of kind of self-knowledge and self-discovery and having the means to go exploring and try to find out what it is that you might want to do with your life. And then the third dimension was about these outcomes that tell you that you're thriving, that indicate to you that you have found the things that best suit you in terms of your values or your relationships or the way you spend your time. And interestingly, there wasn't much of an emphasis here on happiness or pleasure or things like that, although people did say that contentment and a feeling of being at peace with yourself was an indicator of thriving. The main things that came out here were a sense of meaning and purpose in life, and strong relationships with other people. And there are a few other items that we list in the report. Now, we kind of settled eventually on a tree as a nice metaphor for this theory that captures a sort of dynamic nature of it. We had a lot of difficulty ordering these dimensions into some kind of hierarchy. So there was a sense that you needed basic needs before you could do the other stuff, but they weren't strictly necessary. You could think of an ascetic monk who's still thriving despite not having much, or someone who's come to the end of a very long and wonderful life. We'd say that they're thriving even though maybe they're terminally ill. So how can we organize these ideas? And the idea was that this tree actually does that quite well. So the means are sort of the roots and the soil quality. And then once you have that, those are the kind of the basic requirements for a tree to start growing. You still then need to have the process. What sort of tree, what sort of shape does that tree want to take? And then once the tree is starting to kind of get a handle on itself, it's starting to grow into the kind of tree that it wants to be, then you'll start to see these outcomes. And we think of those as the flowers and the seeds and the leaves and the other kind of accoutrements of the tree. And this way we can manage a lot of those difficult cases that we weren't sure how to organize with just the 3 dimensions. I just want to have one last slide. A question that we always get on this methodology is, well, this is all good and well, but it's quite niche. How are you going to generalize this? How can you scale it up? And we're actually quite optimistic about this, but we do think it will take quite a long time. The basic idea is to repeat this methodology at adjacent nodes of public policy or adjacent nodes of organization. So in the case of our work here with Turn to Us, we'd really like to repeat this process with sectoral partners, that say charities that work on rehabilitation or debt or homelessness, this kind of stuff. And then once each of those groups has their own contextualized theory of thriving, they can then all get together as a further group and develop a more generalized, more abstract theory of thriving that can inform the whole sector. And they can then use that potentially to lobby public policy, lobby the government. And then we could do a further round where we actually get the government involved and develop a theory of thriving with them and associated measures. And in this way, I think we can get a kind of bottom-up approach to wellbeing public policy that really embeds this contextualism, embeds democratization, and embeds these notions we've heard about of power sharing and two-way learning. Okay, that's it for me. I will stop sharing my screen, and I'll hand back to Abby at this point.
Thanks, Mark. So yeah, we've got one more speaker, Jen from Carnegie, and then we'll go to a Q&A. Thanks, Jen.
Great. Hi, good afternoon, everybody. I'm Jen Wallace. I'm one of the directors at Carnegie UK, and I've been asked just to give a couple of reflections from outside of the project on how important it is to the field of wellbeing and indeed to our concepts of research and knowledge in society. So really delighted to be with you here today. So I think the first thing I want to say is, why does co-production really matter for well-being? And I think we've heard through the previous conversations that there are really 2 sides to this. There's the better decision-making, better understanding, knowledge side of it, that when we co-produce, when we understand, when we work with people, we get a better understanding of what's actually going on. And we know, through one of the truisms of wellbeing research is that we measure what matters, but actually we measure what some people think matters, and historically those people tend to be white, male and middle class, and that's not necessarily the entire story of what matters to all of us in society. And while the wellbeing movement is getting better at listening, it's still got a way to go to really understand how different people experience wellbeing. I think the other side to it, and again coming through this research, is that we can understand wellbeing, co-production, wellbeing as an end in itself. It gives people power and voice and control, and I think it leads into the justice element in the tree in terms of the means, that it's part of who we are, that we need to feel that we can participate and have voice, and that feeds our own sense of wellbeing. So both in the means and the ends, I think co-production matters for wellbeing and how it's been done in this project and other projects. Doing co-production properly, as has been done in this project and others that I know of in the field, is an intensely disruptive activity. It's disruptive to our timescales. It tends to take longer to do. It's disruptive to power, as we've heard. It equalizes, which is a wonderful thing, but people find that challenging. It disrupts our linear concept of how we do research. We come up with an idea, a hypothesis, and we test it. Not necessarily if you're co-producing properly, you're going to listen first. You're going to do as much listening as you can in order to construct that process. It disrupts our concept of what impact is in research, because impact isn't just about published papers, it's toolkits and theories and knowledge and engaging with charities. It's a different way of thinking about the impact that we can have in the world. And again, using that means and ends, there's an impact on project participants doing this type of work that you wouldn't necessarily get if you were doing survey research in the way that Anna described. And it also disrupts our concept of skills and what skills are for effective work on well-being and effective research. And if I may, and if I'm able, I will share very quickly some work that we did. No, I can't do it. It's okay. I'll put a link in it. It's work that we did a few years ago with Julia Unwin on relationships. And it both applies to how you do research, but also service provision. And what Julia did really expertly was separate out the rational and the relational. I'm saying our systems, our services, our concept of knowledge has been built on the rational. And there are very good reasons for that. And it's been incredibly helpful to us. It's got us significant improvements in well-being. But it's not great at taking us to the next level, where we probably need to rebuild a little bit more of the softer skills of understanding relationships in society, understanding not just what we need to thrive, but how we need to experience services, communities, and relationships in our lives in order for those to be supportive and thriving relationships. So there's an element in all of this, which is really about trying to bring together the what of well-being and the how of well-being. And that's why I am particularly delighted to see this report out and to be part of this conversation with you today. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Jen. I really appreciate those comments. Thank you. Okay, so we've got probably just under 25 minutes for questions. If anyone would like to just unmute and ask a question, or if we've got a few people, we can raise our hands and I'll facilitate that. Yeah, Polly, go ahead.
Hi, thank you. Thank you so much for your presentations. I really enjoyed reading the report, and this is a really fantastic piece of work. So well done to everyone involved first. So I'd really love to hear some more about how you envisage this model being used by organizations. So I was thinking that the reason that lots of institutions use very simplified models of well-being, the kind that Anna was talking about, is because there's this perceived need to aggregate across individuals and come up with some sort of aggregate picture of how the institutions are doing, how well they're performing. And sometimes funding and finances are dependent on that. And the account that you've developed, the picture you've developed, is really rich and highlights the personal nature of thriving. And obviously that resists aggregation in some ways. And so I was just wondering how you see it being used by organizations. Can it be used alongside other kinds of measures of well-being? Yeah, and how does it fit in with those other pictures of well-being that organizations might be using?
Thank you so much, Polly. Shall I think maybe Mark and I could take that, but Abby, if you, since it's a question about how organizations manage it, maybe Abby and Jen can also speak to it. Polly, thank you for a great question. I think it would be incorrect to pretend that commensuration and aggregation is not sacrificed in parts when we adopt a properly participatory approach. I mean, that's the whole point, that it should be open to coming up with something completely different that doesn't map on clearly. And I think the sooner we realize that there is this trade-off between truth to life and legitimacy on the one hand, and aggregation on the other, the more honest our decisions will be. We might be able to just sort of speak out and resist the demand for aggregating all our data into one, or we might say, well, okay, on this occasion, I'm going to prioritize aggregation. That's my view, but I think others will probably have theirs.
Yes, I'm going to come in my imperfect world in the sort of NGO sector, that actually there is so much that can be done to improve and develop concepts of evaluation within services, that working at that level is incredibly valuable and valid in order to improve well-being. That almost, you can leave the issue of, aggregation and so on and let policymakers worry about some of that separate, because we do have an opportunity to improve just through the wonderful work that so many organizations do. Ideally we would be in a society, in a place where we had perfect and strong measures, but this is still so much a developing field that we're very far away from that, and the closer you are to the ground, the harder it is for any of that to make any sense, as Anna says.
Mark, do you have anything to add?
Not really. Maybe a small point, which is just that I think there are some things that I suspect will be able to be generalized and use kind of standardized measures once this process is replicated across different contexts. So two of the big themes in our work were feelings of meaning and the quality of relationships. I know that those pop up in a lot of different contexts. So in those cases, we can use standardized measures. Other things that we were looking at, like having advocates who could help you access the welfare system, came out as a very strong basic means. That sort of thing, I'm not aware of any standardized measures of that, so we'd need to develop one specifically for this context. So we'll see how things evolve, is kind of my...
Yeah, and just to add, I think Polly, you're right with your suggestion that we could use both, like the standardized aggregate, like you said, methods, and also these much more localized co-produce methods. I think there's value to both, and both of them comes with gains and losses. So I would encourage both. Teresa.
Yeah, hi, thank you very much. I really wanted to thank everybody who has presented on this super interesting project. So first of all, I was wondering, because I've done some sort of participatory research exercises myself, and I wonder where you turn to for good examples of how to facilitate these processes, because it's an incredibly delicate task, and it's super important that these things are well facilitated to provide some sort of level playing field on which people can genuinely engage with each other. And I think if you get off on the wrong foot on this, the whole project is presumably jeopardized. And then my second question is a more general question with respect to this trade-off between like different demands for example, aggregation and generalizability of research on the one hand, and then truth to life or legitimacy on the other. And I always wonder about like if there is like some sort of framework or general rules to turn to, because I also have a background in philosophy. So I wonder, like, is there something, a provided rule book or some sort of guidance with principles where you could say, like, in this instance, it seems more worthwhile to prioritize aggregation, and in that instance, it seems more sensible to conduct participatory research. And in general, as I'm a big fan of like participatory research, I wonder what are its limits? Like, what would be a key example of something where you would say like there's not much sense in making this participatory?
Okay, thank you, Teresa. If we go to the first question about like resources for good facilitation, right? I don't necessarily, I do find, to be honest, like I just think facilitation is a very like human thing, and I wouldn't necessarily say that there isn't like a resource that I've gone to. For example, it's more through my like life experience of working with people in a variety of different settings, particularly settings where people are exposed to harm, and it's more around, I would say therefore the resource is frontline experience and kind of experience of real situations strengthens your facilitation. I was just looking, so I came across a tool that I haven't actually trialed, but it's a game called Power Play. And it's like a quick, interesting, like board game style resource that you would use to kind of, I suppose, like more discreetly talk about power dynamics. We didn't actually use that, and I don't think we needed something like that, but maybe that would make up for perhaps situations where that kind of frontline experience isn't there. But yeah, I would say like fundamentally it's like a human nature thing. I wonder if anyone else has.
I can jump in. Thank you, Teresa, for this really excellent question. I mean, it's in some ways we are asked to kind of formalize and sort of provide a rule book for good facilitation. And Abby's remarks emphasize how much just sheer emotional labor went into doing it well, right? And something that you couldn't necessarily describe in a set of rules. And I mean, I suppose it doesn't mean we can't say something about how to do it well, but we probably wouldn't be able to do everything. And I think in reply to your second really nice question about the trade-offs, here again, I mean, it seems to me that often organizations' hands are pretty much tied. You know, if the funder says, provide to me evidence of your impact by the standards that I think impact should be measured, and otherwise you're not getting your funding. I mean, that's pretty much there's nothing you can do. You just have to do what you're told. So I think when you have a little bit of freedom to explore, when you have a little bit of freedom to think about how you'd like your work to be evaluated, that's when you can turn to co-production. That makes it sound like it's a luxury, which really it shouldn't be. But that's all I can think of at the moment. I think there is a comment on your question by Christian. Thank you, Christian. Aggregation makes most sense when it comes to making spending decisions, how much well-being you get per dollar invested. And for more participatory approaches, I see them more more to dig into channels. So thanks, Christian. That's very useful.
Can I add a little bit here? So this question about guidance for facilitators, this was a really big issue for us in the early stages of this research. A lot of people that we spoke to in the deliberative democracy space, in the co-production space, were saying that a lot of this knowledge about how to do these things in a practical way is kind of locked up within individuals who run consultancies in a lot of cases. And other sort of similar organizations. There's no textbook for it, there's no guides. that sort of thing. The working paper that we've done, I tried to make kind of too long in a way so that we could really try to put in all of what we learnt about this kind of stuff in there. And I've also referenced some of the few qualitative research methods that we came across that I thought were useful. So relational interviewing in particular, and the kind of the paradigm of participatory action research, which is a bit more radical than what we kind of ended up going for, but still had a lot of useful insights for us, was in there. But I second Abby's point that it seemed to me like the most important thing was interpersonal skills and just experience of talking to people and being warm, and kind of being able to develop rapport quickly. I was a bit annoyed as well that in a lot of the qualitative research literature that we reviewed, there was an overwhelming emphasis on ethics, which is obviously very important, and just very like vanishingly little discussion of epistemology. Like, how do you know whether you've learnt the correct thing from people? And there was very little discussion of like how to structure questions or the kind of best practice to follow to make sure that you do get the information that you're looking for. So yeah, as I said, we've tried to bridge that in our work, but this is a project over the next 5 years to try to get, to try to write a textbook of how to do this stuff, because I think it's important.
Yeah.
Sorry, James, you go. You guys talk too much.
That's okay. Yeah, I just wanted to add from a co-production point of view, from someone who's providing a lot of the raw data, if you like. It's important that someone has, who owns the project. So there's two main leads, I guess. We got Anna and Mark from the academics, and also Abby at Turn to Us. So, and for those to set the kind of timelines and do the logistical things, Mark set up like a shared file online in the cloud that we could track our interviews, for example, that we're doing with each other. So we know the project's managed well. It's outside of our responsibility as co-pro partners. And that really helps. So we have clarity on the tracking, but who's going to be, also Mark wrote a lot of it, compiled a lot of it. So it takes a lot of pressure off people with the lived experience who are potentially going through some emotional things, sharing this maybe for the first time. Someone have said it many, many times. So taking that weight off the shoulders allows more freedom and being more open, honest, all those softer, tangible skills that are really quite open. And I come up with a term, having an open ear is really quite very important, because that will help to build empathy, and that builds understanding. And that was essential really to get the true output and the realism to a study that otherwise, in the traditional methods might not have really given any new insight into thriving or well-being.
Thanks, James. So we've probably got time for one, maybe two more questions. So I'll go to Lee.
Hi everyone. Lee from Income Max here. Congratulations on a great theory of thriving, and I think for me, I've been talking about thriving for a long time, and it's so great to see thriving come to the fore with this report. My question was really just around like building momentum, because it's such a big topic and it's such an important one. How do you guys envisage building momentum as we kind of push for a focus on thrive thinking, as opposed to kind of always focusing on poverty and the big issues that kind of I think sometimes we get a little bit swamped in. So yeah, just a question around like building momentum, because I'd hate for this report to kind of, let's face it, the sector, all industries have lots of reports that come out, get a lot of excitement, and then really sort of don't sort of seem to take off. So yeah, just a question around momentum really.
Thanks so much, Lee. I think that's a really, really important question. And so I think from the perspective of momentum within the charitable, like the anti-poverty charitable sector, the like main challenge with momentum is just like sheer capacity. Like, for example, like this report was kind of finished in June, but due to the like amount of like service work that Turn to Us does, it's only getting launched now. So there's a massive issue, and I think it is the same for like all charities that are providing a frontline service. So trying to do these like abstract thinking topics is a massive challenge. So I think it's important for organisations in the anti-poverty sector to definitely have like dedicated members of staff like myself who are dedicated to the stuff that isn't on the front line, the stuff that is slower and it is more abstract, and to ensure that we are like pushing the conversations around, like you said, not just focusing on the kind of like slightly problematic voyeurism of like, look at the poor, poverty, all the kind of negative aspects. And I actually think that working in this way, so that my job is solely to push for co-production at Turn to Us, once you are in that way of thinking of like working with and not doing to people with lived experience, you're naturally more open to concepts like thriving. Because actually, if you are, you have that narrative within your organisation. So the things that you're like pushing for and you're funding, you're not necessarily just being asked to kind of prove how bad situations are. You actually kind of, you're more encouraged to look at the full person and the full situation. So yeah, momentum is something that we have to, commit to. So you need people in post to commit to it and push it, and good relationships. So again, interpersonal skills, so that like I can talk to Trussell Trust and Joseph Rowntree, and we can really push for a different way of looking at poverty.
Definitely. An army of thrive thinkers, that's it, isn't it? Or an army of thrivers, But yeah, congratulations though, Abby, on a great report, and I'm tweeting the life out of it at the moment. So yeah, good stuff.
Thank you. Does anyone else on the panel want to take that point?
About momentum, maybe Jen can speak to, because she probably has a lot of experience.
So I think it's really important to see these things as part of our movement, rather than just a launch, or just one report. So I think the general trend towards engagement and participation in power, you can feel that and see it sometimes in certainly in the NGO circuit, some aspects of local government, and so on. I think getting it to the point where someone put in some of the bigger funders and organizations take note of it, I think is the real challenge, and that is in the space of alliances, and building relationships and being part of that type of world. And I think that the point made about actually some of these things that are seen about as back office, or not front line, they're really, really important if we're actually going to be able to move to sort of better systems and preventative systems, rather than just trying to address challenges when they come downstream. So it's all vitally important, but it's really, for me, it's about collaboration. It's about finding people who are on the same journey, and going that distance together to try and make the biggest change that we all can. I hope change is coming. I did a lot of presentations last year about the Overton window, that somehow, because we're coming through an emergency phase of a pandemic, that there was going to be a window of sort of policy making and change, and things were going to get positive, and that didn't quite happen as we went into that horrific winter, and this year it certainly feels a lot more subdued in terms of whether people really feel that change is possible, but I have high hopes. I'm an optimist at heart, so I think it's just about keeping the faith, keeping the evidence, actually, keeping some of that in line with our core values as well really matters. Thank you.
If it's okay, I'll also speak about building momentum on the wellbeing sciences side of things. So many of you who kindly attending here, I was thinking especially Sarah Connolly, Ollie Mitchell, but I'm sorry if I'm not mentioning everyone. You have trialed participatory approaches, you have written about their importance, and I guess my hope is that we are going to be able to articulate this as a methodology for research. If you can't do co-production, then at least you could try and approximate it in some other ways and develop different ways of approximating participatory methods. At this point, participatory methods in well-being is such a small niche topics, and it really shouldn't be. It shouldn't be any more strange than working with giant databases and trying to estimate a happiness equation. These are all just different modes of knowing well-being and thriving. And for me, success would mean people feeling comfortable doing this in their research and not feeling they have to apologize for it.
Thank you, Anna. I'm going to draw this to a close now because we're 2 minutes to. So thank you everyone for joining. I hope you found it interesting and exciting. We're certainly really proud of what we've achieved and excited about the next step of it. Thank you especially to all the panel, Anna, Mark, James and Jen. And yeah, thank you. Have a good day.